You've heard of mindfulness, Work Positive Nation, maybe even read about it. So, how can mindfulness help you create a positive work culture? My guest on this episode of the Work Positive podcast is an accredited mindfulness teacher, wrote the book Organizational Mindfulness, and shares with us a method to help leaders and their teams embed mindfulness techniques in their organizations. So listen up, lean in, and let's discover how mindfulness helps you and your teams improve performance in a way that's sustainable and promotes well-being on this episode of the Work Positive podcast.
Welcome to the Work Positive Podcast with your host, executive coach, and culture architect, Dr. Joey Fawcett. Discover strategies and tactics that work positive as Dr. Joey talks with industry leaders who create a positive work culture that attracts top talent and reduces team turnover. Discover how you can create a work positive culture that increases productivity and profits. Here's your host, Dr. Joey.
Work Positive Nation, meet my new best friend, soon to be yours, Andrew McNeill. Andrew, thanks so much for being on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. How are you today, my friend?
I'm great, and thank you so much for inviting me on. It's a real privilege.
Oh, the privilege is mine, absolutely mine, because we're talking about one of my favorite topics, mindfulness. So what does mindfulness mean to you, Andrew McNeill?
Well, mindfulness means to me a whole load of stuff, Dr. Joey, a whole load of stuff.
Whole load of stuff. All right.
But if I was to boil it down to one thing, I would say it is the key technique that has transformed my life and enabled me to be a better leader, coach leaders to be better leaders, and to navigate my own well-being in a way which has been a complete game changer. So
Wow.
that's my experience of mindfulness.
Wow, it's your story and you're sticking to it. Well, it sounds like there's an amazing story behind this. Inquiring minds want to know how you first encountered mindfulness and what transformation it prompted in your life.
Sure, I'm very happy to share that. So roll back about 12 years, and I'm working in a leadership role in a very large organization. And like lots of leaders, I hit a great big wall, and I'm not in a happy place. I am not positive, Dr. Joey. I am not in a positive place at all.
You are not working positive at all, are you?
Not working positively. I'm pretty broken, and I'm
wow.
after myself. My health isn't great. I'm not present with my family. I'm not performing well at work. It's just not working. And so I reach out to a dear friend of mine that I went to school with, and in that intervening time, so I'm sort of early 40s at this point. So in that intervening time, this friend of mine has become a Buddhist priest, and I often joke with him that everyone should have a mate who's a Buddhist priest. I say to him, look, have you got any tips, any help at all? And he said, perhaps unsurprisingly, mindfulness. And I'll be honest with you, my heart sank.
Oh.
I'd seen his lifestyle, and he lives in a commune, and he lives a simple life. And Dr. Joey, I like things. I like my house. I wanted a car. I wanted a very conventional lifestyle. And I looked at this and I thought, I do not want to become that guy. I respect everything about your life choices. I totally get it. I totally respect where you are.
But your response was, what else you got?
Yeah, exactly that. But you know what? I was broken, and so I thought, I've got to give something a go. Yeah. So I went on a 2-day retreat, and on that retreat, I realized that if my thoughts were overwhelming me, perhaps having a different relationship to my thoughts could help. That was what unlocked for me a desire in learning more. So I got a book, and I started practicing mindfulness. And I've got to be honest with you, my life is still very conventional. I still have a car. I still have a normal house. I do not live in a commune, but I have brought mindfulness into my life. I'm still very dear friends with that dear friend of mine who introduced me to it, and I'm always grateful to him because for me, it has unlocked the capacity to have a different relationship with my thoughts and to be able to respond to scenarios rather than to react to them.
Ah,
And that has been a game changer. So
mm,
I went back to work after not very long. I'd just taken a couple of weeks off. And within about 6 months, my boss had come up to me and said, "We think you're ready for the next level." Now, I always say,
wow.
Dr. Joey, mindfulness doesn't guarantee a promotion.
Yeah, the lawyers make you put the disclaimer in there.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Mindfulness is no guarantor of future
There
success.
is no guarantee. But what was interesting for me was that I then went for the promotion eventually. I thought about it. I thought I finally reached a place in my life where I don't feel like I need it because I'm now a lot calmer and I'm not happier.
Oh,
So
wow.
why would I do this? Why would I do this to myself?
Mm,
And I realized that actually what this process had helped me with was to understand the values that sat behind my leadership. And that if I were to go for the next role, I'd be able to play that out on a bigger stage. And so I
ah,
went for that job, and I think I got the second job that I went for at the next level up.
mm,
And suddenly then I'm in a much more stressful environment. I'm dealing with a whole load more pressure, but
mm.
now I'm thriving rather than drowning in it.
Ah, oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, and you and I were talking in the green room about how mindfulness helps you when the chaos becomes overwhelming and it's just more chaotic to find that place of calm within. So, somebody listening to this is getting ready to push the pause button or thumb through to something else because they're going, "Ah, this is too squishy." But let's talk about a couple of things that you just said. First of all, let's explore. You found a different relationship with your thoughts. I love the way you worded that, by the way. And the perceived core practice is the first of creating a positive work culture in the work positive style. So let's talk about what your relationship is like now with your thoughts and where you came from.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a lovely expression which I picked up from somebody else. I can't take credit for this, but it's thoughts aren't necessarily facts.
Thank you.
And I always put in the necessarily, because if the thought is that's a bus coming towards me, then that's probably a fact. We've got to act on it.
So step out of the street.
Step out of the street. But there are other thoughts that I have that may not be facts. And
Mhm,
maybe I can take a breath, and maybe I can take a moment, and maybe I can notice that for what it is,
mm,
rather than reacting to that first thought.
mm,
And so having some kind of relationship of knowing that not every thought I have needs to be acted on, not every thought that I have is a fact,
mm.
and then I can just take a pause to consider what's my response to this situation rather than my reaction to this situation.
Okay, and that's the other thing I wanted to talk about, the difference between response and react.
Yeah. Well, for me, the the easiest illustration of that is the moment where you get the email and somebody is having a really bad day. They send something which is either really out of order or
Uh,
unkind or what have
yeah,
you, and
yeah.
you write your response. Do you press send?
Uh-huh.
Do you press send, or do you pause and consider what's the outcome going to be from this?
Yeah, what
Do
are
I
the possible consequences? Yeah.
do I want to lock horns and spend the next however long, days, weeks, months trying to rebuild that relationship? Or do I pause and think, how do I want to respond to this? With
Mm,
anger, with rage, with possible justified anger, who knows? But
hmm,
is that really how I want to respond, or is that just a reaction?
mm.
And the thing for me, which I absolutely love, and this was a game changer for me as well. Have you heard that expression? I'm sure, about being a head on a stick. Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah, so for
Uh-huh.
my original profession was a program manager, so I'd
Okay.
manage major projects and programs.
Uh-huh.
And that's all about problem solving. It's about going from one meeting in the days when everything was in a physical meeting. I go from meeting room to meeting room to meeting room, solving problems or trying to solve the problem.
Mm,
And I
yeah.
do
With a
this.
fire hose, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so I do this in my cognitive space.
Mm,
I do this in my head. and I would forget that I had a body attached to that head, and I would forget that everything that I was doing was just a cognitive process.
Ah,
And of course, what's actually going on is a whole load of physical reactions of fear
yeah.
and also motivations around reward and all that other great physical stuff. But if you're not aware of that, and if
Mm,
you're just acting on your physical reaction, thinking that it's a cognitive response, well, guess what? You can get in a whole load of trouble. So having that capacity to learn a bit more about,
mm,
one, what is my thought process? What are thoughts? How do thoughts affect me? And how can I create a gap between the thought and the action?
mm,
And then building into that a little bit of a flavor of, maybe my body and my, my fear response or my
mhm,
reward motivation is actually driving some of these
mm,
thoughts and some of what feels like a cognitive response.
mm.
Suddenly I'm in a world of having choices, and I think it's that word. I can now choose how I respond to a situation
Yeah.
rather than being driven by my instinctual or reactive self.
Mm. Yes. And rather than geeking out on neuroscience, I'll just note that the caveman or cavewoman in our brains wants to react because it's fight or flight. And so if I feel threatened, I want to keep that saber-toothed tiger from eating me, maybe my boss, maybe a coworker. Uh, and so I react by either killing the tiger or running faster than the tiger, which is not always a good plan. But instead of that, and allowing the amygdala to circulate that fear around my brains, what is it, about 3 laps around my brain, and I can't tell the difference between fear and reality because the fear becomes my reality. So then I react in that space. So rather than doing that, um, I love what our younger daughter is teaching our 4.5-year-old granddaughter, Andrew, and that is, on our level, we refer to it as emotional governance or as a part of emotional intelligence. But when she gets overcome because Gigi said no, you can't have that cookie, she's learned to identify the welling up of those overwhelming emotions, and so she'll just look at me sometimes and say, "Pops, I need a minute." And she'll literally go to her bedroom and sit there and govern her emotions, get on top of those. And then the next thing you know, she's saying, "Pops, come up and play with me." And so then it just takes that moment. Some of us refer to it as it's a spiritual exercise, so we're praying. I'm sure your Buddhist friend does that. And others of us may think about it as taking a breath, inhaling something different and exhaling that reaction. So I absolutely love that process. Now, let's talk about taking mindfulness as you've described it, Andrew, and thanks for sharing your story. Um, let's talk about taking that into organizations. You've written a book, Organizational Mindfulness, which is in the show notes there, so you guys can click on and head over to Amazon, pick yourself up a copy. It's been read by and persons who benefited from over 4 continents. So please get yourself a copy today, Organizational Mindfulness. We're seeking to create a positive work culture. And one of the great challenges that we as human capital and human resource leaders have today is how to attract top talent, right? Because it's very competitive. Um, how do we embed, empower, integrate, incorporate mindfulness into our culture so much so that it literally speaks for itself or carries a reputation beyond our teams so that we can talk about it in attracting top talent and they immediately pick up on the difference because it's a marked difference? How do we do that?
That's a great challenge. I think the first thing to do is to talk about it. So, so if I just roll forward that story that I started a little while ago,
Yeah,
I then 3 years not telling anybody that I was practicing mindfulness because I thought it was weird, and I thought everybody else would think it was weird,
it's
and I thought
squishy.
I'm squishy. Exactly. I was a leader. I was supposed to be, uh, absolutely unstoppable and yeah, absolutely in charge. I didn't need any of that Buddhist nonsense. So
Mm,
I think that actually unpicking, do you know what? if you wanted to give an award to the
Yes.
worst marketing for anything, it would be mindfulness. Because nobody knows what it is, or everybody thinks they know what it is, or they have maybe have a view of what it is. And like I did, it's about sitting in a community, burning joss sticks, sitting on a cushion, yada yada yada.
Shaving your head. You got to shave your
Yeah,
head. Obviously,
yeah.
I'm on my way. Yeah.
Yeah. But and I had exactly the same preconception.
Uh-huh.
I think one of the things to do is to talk about it in the sense of it being a toolkit to help you in your leadership and in your team relationships. So just as we talked about, this is no different in some senses from being Excel or from being some other tool that you might use,
Mm.
PowerPoint presentation, whatever. We have a whole load of tools that we use in our leadership, in our organizational delivery,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't think of that as being squishy or being soft. We might use a squishy or a soft picture in one of our PowerPoint slides, but that's okay because it's on a product which is all officey.
Yeah.
Well, if we start thinking about the fact that we might routinely go to the gym to stay fit and healthy to be able to perform more effectively at work, well, why aren't we thinking about our minds in the same way? And why aren't we looking at how do we keep our minds in the right condition to be able to be operating both at our best performance, but also to look after our well-being while we're doing that, to build that kind of positivity and to build that kind of sense of being in the right state of mind to do whatever it is that we do as a job. So I think reframing mindfulness as being something which is a toolkit to help you look after your well-being and to be the best you at the best point that you possibly can be is a key point to it.
Yeah, I'm thinking mental calisthenics, mental thought lifting. I'm teasing that out, lots of metaphors there because yeah, we do have well-being. I prefer well-being over wellness, but we have well-being programs and they tend to focus on the physical, so why not the mental? So when I'm talking with top talent and I'm seeking to attract them, what mindfulness spaces can I create within my current culture that I can then talk about to this top talent to attract them to come work with us?
So I think that one of the things which I've done, which has been a game changer. So I worked on a very intense program, which had over here we have a prime minister rather than a president, and it had the prime minister's interest. It had a lot of pressure going on. It was a national program, and we introduced mindfulness at the start of the senior team meetings.
Really?
And so we had a 2-minute practice. Sometimes it was 30 seconds. It can be incredibly brief. But what that did, so if I don't want to spoil the punchline about the book, but one of the things I talk about in the book is that for me, program management and indeed almost everything that we do in an office environment is a mindful practice. It's just we do it incredibly badly. Let me explain.
Please.
John Kabat-Zinn's, your brilliant psychologist who kind of found some of the clinical evidence for mindfulness being helpful in the clinical setting quite early on. He describes mindfulness as non-judgmental present moment awareness. So if you break that down, non-judgmental, present moment, and awareness. Now, any business meeting, any program board, any executive board, what are you trying to achieve? You're trying to achieve people coming with an open mind to facts and information, ideally, leaving their judgment, leaving their prejudgment outside so that they can come and make a decision based on the evidence, based on the information. Present moment. Wouldn't it be nice if people were actually aware and present in the meeting?
What?
And
Rather than importing all the baggage from the last meeting they were in or their preconceptions about this meeting.
100%. And that's where and we do it badly comes from, because everybody's sitting there on their phone, or they're thinking about the last email that they've sent or the next meeting that they're going to. So how much of anybody listening to this podcast is actually here? Who's already thinking about something else?
Or doing something else, right?
Yeah, there's always something else. So the capacity to bring your attention into the room, and this is what we did in the senior leadership team. we invited everybody to share 30 seconds or 2-minute practice at the start of the meeting, just to center. And one of the directors who left shortly before I did said as she left that this was the most collaborative senior team that she had ever experienced, and she put that down to mindfulness.
Wow.
As a game-changing environment, what happened from that team was that because the senior leadership team were talking about it and doing it, other people across the organization were talking about it, wanted to learn more about it. We started running some actual mindfulness training sessions. We invited other teams to talk about it and introduce it into their sessions. And so it started to cascade. So there's a lot more. I mean, I could witter on about this for hours, to be honest with you, but for me, the last thing I'll say just about talking about attracting the talent, if I may, is my kids learned about mindfulness, even though I already had a practice at school.
Really?
They didn't learn about it from me. They were already being introduced to it in their early years school. And that for me means that as they are now coming out of university, they're expecting this. This is what they expect to find.
Thank you.
People who are a little bit more mature in their career, it may still be novel. But for people who are much earlier in their career, they want to know where the mental health program is. Not because they're necessarily struggling with their mental health, but because they don't want to. They want to have a program which is preventative to help them thrive in a high-pressure environment. So mindfulness isn't novel or contentious or weird anymore for the next generation, or not for lots of them. It's an opportunity for us as senior leaders to introduce it, to encourage people into an environment which welcomes them and wants to look after them as well as empower them to thrive.
I love that. And that's one of the distinctions we're seeing over and over and over in companies that we work with is Gen Z wants that and expects that I'm not just here to do the job. I'm here to align my daily task with the company purpose, and I want to, live in that alignment for meaning, purpose, and satisfaction and things like that. The other thing you reminded me of is oftentimes, and I just stumbled on this, I guess, 20 years or more ago, whenever I'm doing particularly a small group leadership team, C-suite, there's just a few of us in the room, I begin our time together, regardless of what we're there to do, whether strategic planning or group coaching or team coaching, I begin by asking them what they brought into the room with them this morning or this afternoon that would keep them from being fully present. And boy, that just breaks the ice in a totally different direction than they were thinking, because they're expecting some expert consultant to come in and tell them everything they need to do when all their answers lie within them. And so we're there to get together in the present moment and to that woman's point, make it collaborative. So when I'm in the interview process with top talent and I'm seeking to attract them, I'm going to say things to them like, we begin all of our meetings with a mindfulness activity, and it varies, and then we just describe briefly some of those techniques. I absolutely love that. And by the way, the attract top talent phrase is intentional. We're not recruiting. We're not trying to sell somebody and come into work here. We are embedding mindfulness into our culture, or whatever else it is that creates positive work culture, and then attracting top talent so that we can talk to that. And they talk to anybody and they say, yeah, that's the way we started meetings. So it almost answers the next question that I want to ask you, and that is, we've attracted top talent. Now, how do we keep them on our teams? Because sometimes my back door is bigger than my front door when it comes to people entering and exiting my company. How do I take mindfulness to the next level? Maybe that's a better question.
Well, for me, a natural thing that can flow from having a mindful culture is psychological safety. And for me, the idea of, again, creating an environment where as many people as possible are pausing before they respond rather than reacting, creates an environment where people can say things knowing that they're more likely to be respected and at least heard, even if that idea isn't followed through. So one of the things which was, I'm sure familiar to you and your listeners, but one of the things which really resonated with me was the Project Aristotle work in Google, where they were looking at why do some of the teams perform better than other teams? And their solution, or after lots and lots of research, was psychological safety. And for me, as a major project leader, it makes complete sense. How can I can't know everything. It's too big a program. So if somebody isn't saying to me, Andrew, there's this massive risk over there, you need to mitigate that risk, it's going to happen. I'm not going to see it. But if they think Andrew's going to laugh at me, they're going to mock me, then that's not going to happen. And similarly, if somebody says there's a great opportunity, go after that client, but they think, oh, Andrew's going to think it's ridiculous, I'm never going to hear about that opportunity. We're never going to win that client. So for me, this idea of creating psychological safety means that you have a place where people feel that they are participatory and looked after and safe to express themselves and their views. And I think that feeds into inclusion. I think that feeds into welcoming diversity in all of its forms. And I think the one thing that I will add to that, as you know, Dr. Joey, one of my favorite things is around kindness. And I would add that within our how do we choose to respond rather than react, is drop in a few little drops of kindness. You end up with an environment where, why would you want to leave? Because you're being shown respect, you have an opportunity to speak and be heard, your voice counts for something, you are included, and people are kind to each other. Where are you going to go?
I'm going to go to work every day with that same team, because goodness knows, I love that. A few drops of kindness, and they really do go a long ways. It's very effective, empowering. And as a very, very famous football coach here in the U.S., being American football, Bear Bryant once said, "It don't cost nothing extra to be kind." I love it. If we could just hold, Andrew, in our minds the notion that everyone's struggling with something. You very transparently talked about your brokenness. I share that broken state with you. The harder I try to do what's right, the more I do what's wrong, oftentimes in my own life. So if we can just give each other a break and know that we're all just trying to figure it out, and we can figure it out together. I can discover what you need that I can help you with, and you can help me, and to just that basic instinctual response of leaning into people and being kind is absolutely amazing. Andrew McNeill is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Friends, you're absolutely intrigued with this conversation, I know, just as I am. So unless you're on the Peloton or walking the dog or something, go to LX Leaders. That's L as in Lima, X as in X-ray, leaders.com. Or you can just go to the show notes beneath whatever you listen to this on and click on URL there, and you'll discover all sorts of amazing things and more information. Of course, over at Amazon, there's Organizational Mindfulness. We have got that link as well. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to Andrew's LinkedIn profile, so you can communicate with him directly and discover more. What are some of the challenges that you see today, Andrew, for companies incorporating or just beginning some of these mindfulness factors and creating a positive work culture out of that?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is the misunderstanding with what it is, and that sort of retro view, that sort of still throwback idea of what a corporate entity should be and how it should behave. I think overcoming some of those biases and not people not being aware of the financial value as well as the sort of well-being value, which I think is the same thing. I always think that we talk about well-being and profit as if they're separate things, but anybody who's had to recruit somebody and go through that process because the person's had to leave because they're completely burnt out knows that there's a huge cost there. Yeah, so it's not rocket science to realize that looking after our people and creating a constructive environment is going to be absolutely critical to our financial success.
Right.
So I think that's one of our biggest barriers to organizations. I think having the opportunity to challenge those misconceptions is key. And I think the next thing is to know how to do it.
Yeah, to do so mindfully.
Yeah,
Kindly.
kindly and mindfully, how do you actually get people to start bringing it into the culture of the organization?
Mm. Well, I would recommend a great way is by reading a copy of your most excellent book, Organizational Mindfulness. And so, as I mentioned a moment ago, that link's in the show notes. Go over and get yourself a copy, and just find something in there that you can begin incorporating into your own positive work culture. So when you go to lxleaders.com, Andrew, what are they going to find on your website there?
Well, they're going to find a range of offers around the kind of programs which we present for organizations. We do a lot of work with senior leaders and leaders who are on their early journey. You mentioned your granddaughter, I think it was at the moment, at the start, being able to really understand how to regulate their emotions. Boy, I wish I'd learned that stuff when I was their age.
Oh, I do too. Yeah.
You know, the thing which I feel is I found this stuff when I was about 42, and that I love every graduate, every early starter in their career to have this kind of training. So we offer courses for groups, for individuals, one-to-one sessions. We offer facilitated sessions for larger teams. We do keynote speaking. We do a range of services to help trying to share the ideas which we're sharing tonight, Dr. Joe.
Most excellent. Most excellent. So Work Positive Nation always wants to know from my guests, and Andrew, I'm on the edge of my seat to find out what yours is. What's one thing relative to mindfulness that you would suggest Work Positive Nation begin doing today to create a positive work culture?
So my suggestion would be give yourself a break and take a breath. Whatever it is that you're about to do next, just take a breath before you start it. And if you want to really make the most of your day, drop in a couple of drops of kindness to whatever action you're next about to take. Because my bet is it'll make a difference.
Absolutely beautiful. Andrew McNeill has been my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast, lxleaders.com. It's in the show notes. Click and do yourself a favor. Click and go over and check that out. And then go over to Amazon and get yourself a copy of his most excellent book, Organizational Mindfulness, and connect with him on LinkedIn. His profile URL is right there in the show notes. Andrew, I'm better for this conversation today. I know Work Positive Nation is as well. Thank you, my friend, for sharing so much of yourself and your story about mindfulness with us today.
An absolute joy. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends who are HR and small business leaders so they can do one thing today to create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits. I'd like to give you a free Work Positive course just for listening. It's called Something to Talk About, and it's transformed the work conversations of so many people all over the world. Get your free copy when you go to workpositive.today/something to talk about, and you can start transforming your conversations today. Remember, it pays to work positive.